So for the last few months, I've been working on random level generation, but mostly I've been focused on the problem of, given a room of a certain size, how do I populate that room? Where do I put platforms? Where do I put ladders? Where can I put, enemies, treasure chests, doors that lead to other rooms, all of those sorts of things. What I really haven't dealt with until just this week is solving the problem of figuring out what the entire level as a whole is going to look like, what that structure will be. Until this week, I've been working in a test map where I had sort of a central vertical hub room with branches going off to each side. So if you've seen any of my my videos from the past few weeks, you may have seen that it was sort of, I had these like long horizontal treks where I would find a treasure chest on one side and then sort of have to backtrack through a room that I had cleared out to get back to that main hub. I talked a little bit in last week's video about how that was starting to feel really bad and really frustrating, and thinking that like if I built levels like that for real, I would almost certainly need a mini map to help you find your way around. And mostly this week I got to the point where I was like, that's not fun. That's not, I think, where the fun of playing a Gunmetal Arcadia game is. So what I've done is I've actually sort of gone back in the direction of the levels that I built for Gunmetal Arcadia 0, where levels are mostly linear and sort of punctuated by a mini boss fight in the middle and then a boss fight at the end. And I'm looking at ways that I can sort of generalize that pattern, generalize the ways that I would have built levels by hand in code, so that I can generate hundreds or thousands of levels that sort of follow the same patterns. In fact, I'm going to pause for a second here and find my notebook. So I'm not sure how well this is going to show up on camera here. I could try the webcam too. But this is some notes that I had taken when I was working on Gunmetal Arcadia 0, sort of trying to find patterns of levels, just even for the 6, or at one point it was looking like maybe 8, but the finite number of levels that I built for that game. And I went back to those notes and I was like, okay, I remember what I was doing here. I remember the thoughts I was having on how the tension of a level would escalate, leading to a mini boss fight, and then you would have a drop in the tension because there's a safe room after that where I can put shops and inns and those sorts of things, and then tension ramps up again to a boss fight at the end of the level. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. That feels like a pattern that I can very easily generalize. So that's what I've done this week. I've started building levels, hopefully for real. We'll see. I may end up tweaking this stuff again in the future, but yeah, I've started building levels sort of in the style of 0. So I'm going to switch over to my PC here and play through one of these and sort of talk about what's going on as I step through this. So the way this works is it drops me into a level. The first room is always going to be a safe room. There's no enemies in there, but there might be a doorway that leads to something else. So for instance, this could be a challenge room with enemies, and it's not in this case. It's an empty room. This could be potentially used for a shop or an inn or one of the faction outposts, but I don't have anything populating those yet. But it's not a challenge room. So what you'll see as I advance is I'll begin finding enemies in each of these rooms. And I'm not yet doing anything as far as like figuring out what enemies are appropriate for a level based on how far you are in the game, but I will be doing that eventually. I'll also be doing more with putting different types of enemies in each room, so you don't just see the same guys every time. Hopefully you won't see like 3 of these guys flying around in the final version of the game. But what you see here is now we have a branching path. I can go up or I can go to the right. And I know, because I've designed the algorithm, the critical path goes up. Currently, if there is a vertical path, that's always the critical path. And I'm not necessarily sure I want that in the final version, but it doesn't necessarily feel bad. That is typically how I built levels in 0 as well. If there was a vertical path, that would always be the critical path, and anything else would be some optional content like this. So for instance here, there's another branch over here where there's a door that leads to something. I could go through there and find out what it is, but I'm just going to keep going on the critical path here. So I'll climb to the top of this room and we'll see if it generates another branch up here. So critical path is going to be to the right, but once again it's created another branch. Once again I'm seeing, it feels odd to have 3 of the same enemy running around. So that's definitely going to be one of my goals in the near future, is figuring out combinations of enemies that work well together. But it has created this branch over here to the left, and we have some treasure over here and another door that leads somewhere else. I've sort of stubbed out placeholders for where I can adjust the frequency of these branches, the frequency of doors that lead to other rooms in the background, and those sorts of things. So we're seeing a lot of those in this level here, but that's going to be something where maybe you can find items that affect the frequency of those branches, or what I've talked about from the beginning, where the way you play the game may affect future sessions. That might be the sort of thing that I decide to roll into that system. So again, we have another branch over here. I'm not going to go through all of those. So I'll come down here. We should be getting close to the mini-boss. In fact, it may be this next room here. Oh, I should mention too, seeing as how we're seeing these same eyeball enemies that were in the first room. One of my goals is to probably weight the appearance of enemies based on how recently you've seen them. So hopefully you wouldn't have that sort of thing where it's like, man, I just saw these same enemies 2 rooms ago. Okay, this is not the mini boss room yet. Somewhere up here we should have a room. That's just a single screen that doesn't scroll. Alright, so yeah, this would be the mini-boss room. It doesn't scroll. Both of the entrances are on the bottom level. That's by design. That's hard-coded in there. It would spawn a mini-boss in here. Of course, at some point, I'll go through and make it procedurally generate sort of the patterns around the edges of the screen, where you'd have the vertical lines and then the skull and crossbone icon identifying this as a boss room or a mini-boss room, just like I did in Zero. I don't have that in there yet, but that'll be coming at some point in the future. Oh, this is a very subtle thing here. Let me bring up my mouse cursor. So this block here, this is not actually part of one of the prefabs that I built for this level. That block exists because when I come to this room, this block exists, and I know that the collision between rooms should always be, it needs to match up with whatever's next to it. So it's actually going through on a room by room basis, and if the edges of 2 rooms don't match up, it adjusts them to compensate. So just a little thing I thought I would point out there. So then I can, we have another safe room here. There's no enemies here. This would be a good opportunity for shopkeepers and inns and stuff, so you can heal yourself, maybe change out your weapons and so on. But I'll keep going, and basically what we'll see is, I'll go through a number of combat spaces, just like I did before, and eventually reach a boss fight, which, again, I don't have bosses in here yet. Just like the mini-boss, it will be an empty room with no platforms, no ladders, nothing like that. Well, I guess I'll just keep going until I reach that. Alright, so yeah, I believe this is the boss room here. Yeah. So this is the boss room. Again, no enemies in here yet, but also no platforms. It's just an open space. And then we'll come here, and there's one last room, and this is the end of the level. So that's sort of the structure of levels in the roguelike game as I'm thinking it may ship. We'll see. I do have variables in there, so like I said, I can change the frequency of branches, the frequency of doors. I can change the length of the level as a whole, and that's something I can imagine where if you're rushing through levels very, very quickly, then maybe on your next session I say well, the enemies have dug deeper into the tunnels, so now the levels get a little bit longer. That sort of thing. I don't yet have any sort of notion of escalating tension throughout the level, but that's something that I'm planning to add. So, as you get closer to a boss fight, you'll start to see tougher enemies. I'm imagining, every enemy spawn opportunity will be sort of flagged with a certain intensity. So, tougher enemies will only appear in the appropriate places. But yeah, it's already with those changes, it is more linear, but it also feels more like, more like what was fun to me about Zero. So hopefully, once I get some real, prefab assets in there and stuff, hopefully I can start to feel a little bit more. Right now, it's very like homogeneous as you play through. Like you see the same placeholder prefabs over and over, and the same enemies appearing in combination and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the sort of stuff that I'll be looking at addressing in the very near future, and I think hopefully it should start to actually be fun to play through these levels. I'm also thinking about how I want to address the idea of champions. I didn't have champions in Zero, but I like the idea that maybe you enter a room and one of these enemies is super tough. He's identified, maybe he has a unique name, maybe he has a different palette swap, maybe he's like, I don't know, flashing or something, and then of course he has more health, does more damage, drops more loot when he dies. So I'm trying to figure out how that will work. Like from a technical perspective, the mix-ins that I recently added to allow me to like spawn enemies in challenge rooms that can, count the number of enemies remaining until the doors unlock. That same system could allow me to very easily say, okay, here's all of the markup that I would need to augment a character with to flag him as a champion. So then it becomes a question of, okay, how and when do I know to spawn these guys? How often do you see them? What's the maximum number that you can see per level, per room, and so on. The other thing I've been working on this week is reporting statistics on how frequently every prefab can appear in each level. So I'll go back to my PC here for a second and show how that works. What I'm doing in code is I spin through the level generation algorithm some number of times. In this case, it's 1,000 times. And I look at, for the level structure that I've created, see how many times each prefab could possibly appear in that level. I do this for a single prefab, which is 1/4 of an entire screen. I do this for prefabs that are 1 across and 2 down, for prefabs that are 2 across and 1 down, and 2 by 2. And then I look at how many times these appear for a single generation, and then across all 1,000 generations. And then I print out some statistics here. So I can see, for instance, this sort of shape, where I have a wall on the right side, a platform here, and then these carrots or up arrows mean that there would be a ladder or an elevator or something to allow me to transition from the bottom to the top, or vice versa, as opposed to just like a gap where you can only fall down that way. I can see this particular prefab could have appeared in all 1,000 runs. So this happens very frequently, and per run it occurs on average 7.5 times. And then of course I have variance and standard deviation there as well, so I can get a better sense of exactly how often these are occurring. But yeah, then I print out tons and tons of these, and when you get down to the bottom, you have things like, okay, this particular pattern where I have like 2 doors and I would also need ladders here going to the top floor. Well, this only occurred 9 times in 1,000 runs. The times they did occur, it only occurred once per level. So probably I would not need a prefab that matches this exactly. I could allow this sort of structure to be handled by smaller prefabs. If I come over to the 1x1 sections, you'll see these generally always appear in every level. The least frequently seen one is like, well, it still happens, about 1/3 of the time, at least once per level, and those sorts of things. But yeah, printing out these stats, this will give me a better idea once I start designing prefabs for real. I know where to focus my attention. So if there's a particular configuration that happens to occur very, very often, I can have a few different versions of prefabs that match that configuration. That way you won't be seeing the same prefabs over and over. I can have more variations of the things that occur most frequently. So that is that's sort of dependent on how I build my levels. If I change the level generation algorithm so it's, you know, not linear and maybe is all branching paths and stuff, well then I would get different results for the stats gathering. But it's fairly quick to generate those. I think like 1,000 generations takes a couple minutes, which is, I mean, it could certainly be faster, but I haven't optimized it at all, so I'm not too worried about that. Yeah, it's definitely, it's exciting to be in a place now where I can start thinking about this as like potentially shipping code. The last couple of months where I've had just that test hub level, it's been a weird thing of like not feeling like that was the real game, and it's finally starting to come together into something that feels like, okay, I understand what this is, I understand how this is going to get fun, so that's a better place to be. As always, thanks for watching. This series is supported through Patreon. I wanted to give a shout out to Patreon supporters Jace, Benjamin, and Opa and Nana for their contributions. You can find the links to my Patreon campaign below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.